name is Moran Avital. I'm the manager of the Pro-Human campaign led by Amnesty International Israel, which initiated this event. I welcome you to this webinar with sociologist Amir Fakhoury, author Iris Leal, and historian and journalist Ofri Ilany, whom I'm honored to host today. Today's webinar will focus on the erosion of the value of human life in Israel after the October 7 massacre and amid the devastating war in Gaza, the military conflict in Israel's border with Lebanon, and the ongoing tensions in the West Bank. How can we explain this erosion? What are its expressions and implications, and how can we fight it? Further, how can we block the expanding dehumanization of Palestinians, especially Gazans, within Israeli society and public discourse? This is the second in a series of online events that deal with the main challenges of human rights work amid the Gaza war and the polarized and toxic public discourse surrounding it. Let me just start by introducing our panelists. Author and publicist Iris Leal's books include We Didn't Dare to Know, Lost Depths, and Taming the Fire, among other books. She has been awarded the Prime Minister's Prize twice and the Bernstein Prize for Literary Criticism. Iris publishes regular columns at Haaretz and writes critiques and essays. Dr. Ofri Ilany is a historian and journalist, editor-in-chief of Van Leer Jerusalem Institute's Hazman Hazeh magazine, and publishes a weekly column at Haaretz. Ofri published a few academic and non-academic books and authored academic articles and chapters in books. And Dr. Amir Fakhoury is a postdoctoral fellow at the Polonsky Academy for Advanced Study in the Humanities and Social Sciences at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. Amir is a lawyer, a publicist, and a political and cultural sociologist. He is the former director of the Community of Human Rights Lawyers in Waat al-Salam, Neve Shalom. In Van Leer, among other roles, Amir is the co-director of the Nissan project, aimed at the research of shared society in Israel. It is a pleasure to host you in our webinar series, and thank you for coming today. The first part of this meeting will include questions from me to the panelists and a discussion on the webinar's topic. At the end of this part, we will have time for Q&A from the audience. Please, you can already from right now start writing your questions via the Q&A function on the bottom bar or in the chat box. As I mentioned earlier, this event is produced by the Pro-Human Campaign, a global network of organizations and individuals led by Amnesty International Israel. It was formed in order to unionize and amplify the various voices that see humans before taking sides amid the horrifying violence and repression in our region. In the face of polarized and toxic public discourse and many voices that promote human rights to only one side while failing to recognize the suffering and risks on the other side, we invite everyone to help us promote a different voice and join the network. Notwithstanding the need to account for power imbalances and oppressor-oppressed dynamics between the two sides, we believe that there is a crucial need nowadays to re-universalize aspects of human rights work globally. So let's start with the first question to the panelists. Israel and Israeli society have always taken pride in holding the value of human life as its first priority in any given situation. For me, and I believe for others, the current war has exemplified worrisome changes in the deep currents which morally navigate our society. As far as you also recognize these changes, can you please tell us how you see them, how do you look at them? And feel free to start, whomever wants to answer first.
Okay. I'll start first. I didn't plan to do it, but I think that at the first moment, at the first day, and then the day after, the horrors of the past rose and haunted and interpreted for most Israeli and Palestinian in Gaza. For them, it was the Nakba. we will be evacuated again and we will be homeless. And for the Israeli, it was the pogrom and the Holocaust. As soon as the most feared, I would say, part of the history started to be the way, the prism which we look at what happened, it was quite obvious that this is the way each of the party to this disastrous war will explain it, understand it, view it, and feel it. So when we feel that the Holocaust is back, and very, very soon, it's important for the people that join us to understand that very, very soon, in mainstream media, Hamas was called Nazis, and the Nazis, Hamas, did that and that to us. Very major and influential journalist would use it and still using it. There was no other way than to feel we are going through a second Holocaust, and we are dehumanized already in the first day. The idea is to extinction us completely, and from there on, it was only a matter of time for this process to happen, to occur.
Anyone else wants to refer?
أقول لا. Ofri,
Yeah, Amir.
בבקשה.
No, go first.
Okay. First of all, thanks for Amnesty for organizing such an important panel on such an important, maybe the most important issue. It takes real commitment and real intellectual and courage to engage with such a theme or such a subject. So needs to be appreciated. So thanks for the organizers. And of course, happy holiday, Eid al-Adha Sa'id, to those who are celebrating Adha. As now is being said, as much as possible, as in a very bad translation. Moran, I don't agree with the premise that as if we were in a very good moral situation, and then we deteriorated into this low point, and it is a low point. I think it is preferable to describe it as a dynamic of moral decay, moral deterioration as part of an intractable conflict, and I'm sure that we'll have time to elaborate on the political aspect, not only on the moral aspect of the phenomenon that we're trying to understand. So the premise that in Israel, the Israeli society appreciated life, and it was only to the best of my understanding, to the best of my judgment, it's only a discursive strategy, not really having a lot of essence to back it. However, we are in the lowest point ever in what concerns dehumanization. When I actually look at the definition of dehumanization, I looked at it today as preparing for this panel. Israel now is actually a textbook. It's showing us the textbook's definition of what is dehumanization. However, and I will end with that to further elaborate more as we progress. The easiest thing to do would be to judge. dehumanization, the lowest point that humanity, and dehumanization is part of humanity. It is part of the repertoire of humanity. It's not in contradiction to humanity, but part of the human condition. A negative part, the most negative part, but is part of the human condition. It will be the easiest thing to describe it, to judge it. However, to transform it, to change it, to combat it, an activist is committed not only to analyzing, understanding, and describing, but also to how to combat, to change, to transform. This will be the most complex and difficult mission that we will have to tackle or engage. How do we change this dehumanization trend that is devouring the national subjects on both sides? And I will end with that.
Yeah, so I agree with Amir and Iris, but I will add something that unfortunately some kind of concern for human life has paradoxically become a mechanism that generates Palestinian death, and I will explain. Indeed, in the last few decades, Israeli society has become more sensitive to casualties, and this sensitivity likely contributed to Netanyahu's hesitation to engage in wars that would result in soldier fatalities. However, once a war breaks out, it leads to a policy of reducing risks to soldiers at the cost of mass killing of Palestinians, primarily through the Air Force and artillery, as published, by the way, for example, by Yuval Avraham at Sicha Mekomit. So there is a policy of minimum risk to the military, to the soldiers. Now, what I've just described was true for to Israel's previous operations in Gaza as well, and in Lebanon and in other fronts. But what has happened in the current war is that, on the one hand, Israel continues this policy of reducing soldier casualties at the expense of massive Palestinian deaths. And on the other hand, as we know, this war began with mass killing of civilians in Israel, and continues with contact Israeli soldier casualties in a pretty large scale. So this leads to an even more extreme policy of yes, being easy on the trigger, and of course there is also an element of revenge, either conscious or some kind of legitimacy. Yes, I wrote around the beginning of the war that we are facing some kind of biblical multiplication of sevenfold, Pi Shiv'a. Yes, there were yes, Pi Shiv'a. There were some 1,200, I think, Israeli were killed, but since then it is much more than sevenfold. It is. I hope it won't be 70-fold.
Just to comment on Amir's comment, I agree with you that this is an ongoing dynamics, but what is bothering specifically, I think, in this war is that voices that used to be more marginalized, that talk about ruining Gaza, killing all the people in Gaza, not such a thing as uninvolved within Gaza. They are much more dominant in this time around. So and I find it very much worrisome because it's more, it represents more of our social situation today.
I agree with you. We are in our lowest point in what has to do with humanization, seeing the other national as a human. It's one cannot argue with that. And yes, very normative, regular people that I meet in my everyday life just truly believe that they have to erase Gaza. There's no innocent people in Gaza. We have to. I've been told that to my face several times by regular people, not zealots or racists or what is considered regular people in Israel. And again, the easiest thing to do is to reduce this phenomenon only to immorality and not trying to understand that this subject, without taking their political agency and without taking away the need to combat it in terms of law, but the law mechanism will be only useful in the short term, in the immediate term. In the long term, in order to make sure that we can uproot this phenomenon, this moral decay, it should be treated in from the political perspective, not only from the moral perspective, while understanding that again the national subject on the two sides, without I'm not hinting for symmetry, but for parity or relationality, and the national subject on the two sides are victims, especially from the strongest side. And I will explain why the Israeli Jews, without pertaining for monolithic analysis of this group, is more inclined or dispossessed for this dehumanization trend. We have to engage it in political terms, understanding that they are victims of this intractable conflict, and victims of the elites. We didn't mention that the political elites in the Israeli side just offer, this is the meaning framework that they offered the audience to understand the violence that they were subjected to. Okay, there's other meaning frameworks, but they offer them this, and Iris mentioned that earlier. They offer them this meaning framework while manipulating past traumas to manipulate present trauma. So there are double victimizations here, and the reading should be political, and the reading of the phenomenon should be political, and the solution, if one can even talk in terms of solution, should be also of political nature.
So before we go into solutions, I want to maybe talk a bit more about the reasons and the factors which influence the expanding dehumanization of Palestinians, specifically Gazans in Israel. So Iris already talked about how she sees it with the reference to the Holocaust and to the Nakba and older traumas of both sides. Maybe you can offer other thoughts, other ideas.
I just want to elaborate for a second, if it's okay, Amir. I would like to talk a bit more about the notion of Nakba and the Holocaust, but to understand what happened to us, to the people involved. What happens when you dehumanize other people? My teachers, I mean, really not, I never met them, but through their text, my teachers about what dehumanization is doing were Primo Levi, the Jewish Italian author, and Jana Marie, the Jewish Austrian origin intellectual which both were in Auschwitz and both wrote about Auschwitz. Jean-Marie suffered from torment by the Gestapo, and he committed suicide 33 years after the Holocaust. Primo Levi, 40 years after the Holocaust. And it's not far-fetched to understand that this was the decision to end their life, was to do with the long-term damages that cause from dehumanization. And they really taught me one thing, which is when you lose, when you cause dehumanization, when you can't see humanity in other people, you lose the ability to believe in human beings, and you lose yourself in a sense. So maybe not in a sense, you do lose yourself, you lose your own humanness. And this is something that have to be repeated, and this is something that we need to understand. We are all going to lose a central part of what being a human being is if we don't see in other people human being. So the damages are, I think, will be, the cost will be terrible for both sides of the conflict.
Yeah, I think we're currently in the middle of a fast-tracked wave of brutalization. I use a concept, I apply a concept used by historians describing, for example, the First World War. During time of war, yes, blood becomes cheap, and people are much less sensitive about death of human beings. Yes, historian George Mosse brings an example that before the First World War, there was a pogrom with just a few dozen casualties in the Russian Empire, and there was a huge outcry. But after the war, by 1919, there were much larger pogroms, around 50,000 people killed in Ukraine, for example. And this time, it barely drew any special attention outside the Jewish communities. So our sensitivities are being dulled. It's like more violence and more brutality. We see the more we are becoming desensitized, and this is a very dangerous cycle.
Would you blame ideology, technology, because you see the messianic stream in Israel is getting stronger on the one hand, and then you see visual images of the war very accessible on social media and the network and everywhere. So how do you
Yeah. So this is another aspect of this very dangerous and fatal cycle, that the fact that we're exposed to so much images of atrocities, and I'm speaking in both sides. Yes, in the beginning of the war, in the 7th October massacre, and now in Gaza. Instead of making us more sensitive, it actually makes us desensitized, as I said. Yes, and just gives us more excuse to be brutalized. And in this way, those technologies that in a way were supposed to bring us information and alarm us against atrocities are only escalating the situation.
Amir, would you like to refer to other factors you recognize to the expanded dehumanization in Israel?
I agree with Ofri that technology has a role here. However, I tend to believe that maybe this is as part of my inherent disposition that the social factors more central here, more central factors. I've mentioned earlier the role of elites, their inclination or their decision to extend a meaningful framework to the public to understand violence in apolitical terms, to decontextualize violence. We have to understand within intractable conflict, a very multi-generational conflict like this one, dehumanization is the last resort when you lose the ability or the willingness to politically understand violence. Okay, this is the easiest getaway, just to dehumanize the other side, because if you humanize him, then you have to hear, you have to engage, you have to face his political demands, and these two groups after 100 years again, not to I'm not offering symmetry because of the tremendous asymmetry, power symmetry, but I'm offering relationality and parity. Domination, and nothing is working. And the only option now, the only political option, okay, the only bilateral political option is engaging on equal foots, engaging the other as politically as equal. So we have to understand dehumanization as giving up, as despair, as frustration, as the last resort, as weakness of the political system, the internal political system, and also the international political system, to extend to the two nations here, a way out of this bloody deadlock. So, given inhuman condition of ongoing conflict for 100 years, it will become more difficult for us to find humans in inhuman conditions, in an inhuman landscape. Humanity is possible only when situation enables the humanity. Okay, so we're finding we will always have, and Moran, I told you that we'll always have people like Iris, special individuals that are resilient to this moral decay. Iris and her colleagues in Haaretz, we will always have them, but society is not resilient to inhuman ongoing conditions. It will fall in every it fell and it will fall in every test. It fell in every test along the history. So before we change the humans, change the situation, end the political landscape, political constructions around them, and enable them to perform this kind of humanity, and they are performing now one kind of humanity. Again, dehumanization is part of the humanity repertoire, performance repertoire. Enable them to perform the modern performance of humanity, which sees the other as equal, sees the other as bearing natural rights, and most and above all, the right to live. If we embrace this political perspective, first of all, we have to understand that maybe I will elaborate on that as we progress. I think
I think we have
to see the other, full stop, not see the other as, not see the other. Now, there is a political reason. It serves a political purpose to dehumanize the other, because it's much easier. It's heartbreaking to say it, but it's much easier to mass kill people when they are not human. It serves a purpose of continuing with mass killing. So there is almost nobody in the political structure here or even there that want to show the other. In Israel, we don't see a lot of images of what happens in Gaza. I don't know what they see in Gaza. The Palestinian, I don't think they are under such an attack that I don't think they have the time or the energy to know what happened here in Israel, the atrocities of 7 and 8 of October. But this is an exercise in being human. See the other, pick one person and try to understand his story, his context. When we see the others, when we see their faces, their life, it's just harder to kill them.
Now, thank you, Iris. We talk a lot about dehumanization of Gazans, Palestinians in the context of the conflict between two sides. Do you recognize dehumanization of Israelis themselves by Israelis? And if so, how do you explain it these days, I mean, during this war?
I will refer to this question in somewhat different direction. We didn't mention of course, the Israelis who were kidnapped, and this is such an important factor in this situation. And of course, we see a dehumanization of those hostages or prisoners or kidnapped, first of all by the Hamas, and in some kind of secondary level by some parts of Israeli society who don't care too much about them, and even become pretty hostile to this cause. But I will add another point, which is, I think, seldom mentioned, that because so many Israelis do feel pity for the kidnapped citizens and the soldiers, some of the the groups in Israeli societies which have, so to say, larger humanitarian sensitivity are sensitive only to them and not to Palestinians. Yes, it is very difficult to hold both. Yes, so some people who are really not into war and violence feel very, very strong pity about the kidnapped Israelis, but have very strong difficulty feeling empathy towards Palestinians. And it is a very practical question, because we see that it is legitimate, it is still legitimate in Israel to protest in favor of a deal for the hostages, for freeing the hostages, but it is almost illegitimate to protest for against killing Palestinians. Yes, so this is another very complex factor that plays, I think, an important role in this specific situation that we didn't see in previous conflicts, and I think it contributes to the again mass brutalization that we see, and the fact that we reached numbers of casualties that we've never seen before in this conflict.
Thanks, Ofri. I think it's a good way to move on and to ask Amir, what can you tell us about the position of Palestinian citizens in Israel? Because they are Israelis as well. What can you tell us about it?
Okay, without portraying them as one monolithic group, one can diagnose emergent phenomena or central dominant stance on this part. Moran, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a notification that okay. But if to judge according to the discourse, the political stances of their political elites, their various political elites, one can easily diagnose a stance which chosen to humanize both parts, to humanize the victims of the unlawful attack of the 7th of October, and of course humanize their co-ethnic Palestinians, co-ethnics. So if we are to look at the various groups between the river and the sea, and the Palestinians in Israel are a group in certain ways because of their very interesting, complex structural positionality between their state of citizenship, of course, and between their mother nation, external homeland, co-nations under occupation. So this group with this unique, or not unique, interesting, what is called post-partition minority, has exhibited a very humanized stance from day one. So if let's say if the boundaries of empathy overlap the boundaries of nationality among the two sides, in what concerns the Palestinian citizens of Israel, the boundaries of empathy exceeded the boundaries of nationality, and they have managed, which is managed to put forward a humanized political stance. What is the politics that can be leveraged or developed from such a stance? And this is a question being asked today. Is we're yet to understand, but is of course worthwhile exploring. What is giving that this is an authentic stance and not drafted or chosen out of out of fear or giving that, assuming that this is an authentic moral and political stance. So it is very interesting to ask why Palestinians from this group will humanize Israeli Jews. Of course, the immediate intuitive answer is that Israeli Jews here are not their prisoners, but they are co-citizens. This will be the first intuitive answer. The second thing, what is called connectedness, communality, everyday life has its. When we think of factors that can restrain dehumanization, maybe this is a good case study to understand what can halt dehumanization. However, what is interesting here is the political potential of this trapped minority, of this post-partition minority, to leverage this moral stance to a political, to more emphasize political agency in this catastrophe, to end this catastrophe.
Yeah. So this is one way to go. Ofri, Iris, do you have any other ideas about how the Israeli society can deal with, combat, and minimize dehumanization, the erosion of the value of human life within it? Or you think the same? That this is the starting point for a solution, what Amir just talked about?
Hopefully, I mean, it's very, very difficult to see such an horizon right now, but definitely things change through time. First of all, the fire should stop, but I will just say, and it was mentioned in one of the questions, that I think narratives that put Israelis in a corner, feeling that it's us or them, really ramp up the dehumanization. And currently, Israel is locked in a siege mentality. And the more we feel trapped in a situation where it's all or nothing, it's harder to see the other side as a human being. And in this respect, the protests abroad are not contributing very much. I mean, I'm not underestimating some effect that the protests might have, because they do contribute to international law and yes, diplomatic pressure upon Israel, which is important. Yes, I think it's necessary that to limit the violence of that Israel is committing. But on the other hand, we definitely, I think we can definitely see that when Israelis see this kind of hatred and very sweeping narratives of that Israel is illegitimate. Yes, sometimes maybe it's a false interpretation of some protests, but not always. Yes, so it definitely pushes Israelis to this siege mentality and doesn't contribute to easing this brutalization.
Politically wise, I think the revolt and the hatred towards Netanyahu and his government by big section, it's important to say it's large section of the public. it's only a little step, only a baby step, but all of a sudden there is more talk about a government which will be formed after an election, after we will throw Bibi Netanyahu out of office and so on. And there is more and more realization it will have to be with the Arab, the Israeli citizens, the Arab Israeli citizens, the Palestinian Israeli citizens. So there is, I mean, it's in a sense, there is something opportunities in it. It to serve us in a sense, but the society, but the understanding, the growing understanding that there is nothing will be nothing will be able to really happen here. No change will happen here if we don't include the 20% of Palestinian citizen, Arab citizen, in politics, in the government that will be formed after. I wouldn't underestimate the fact that more and more people realize it. People that didn't really want to look at it before as a possibility, and they are sort of central liberal, I would say. So when you cross this taboo, when you realize that, you know, it will benefit the whole society to conclude the include the Arabs citizen, I think a change, a shift will occur in the view of, you know, of the whole issue of Palestinian and Israeli conflict. It will start because we need to, because we hate Bibi more than we dislike or distrust the Palestinian maybe, but it will be a starting point that something can grow out of it and will be positive. But maybe I'm too optimistic.
Let's hope not. I invite the audience to write their questions now. I'll start by reading the first 3 or 4 questions we've got, and you're invited to write more. We have something like 35 minutes left for this meeting, so let's start. So Adela Shapira writes, and well, she writes a comment, so maybe let's leave it for later. Daphne Avital. She asks, how do you distinguish dehumanization from defensiveness? If Israelis and many Jews worldwide believe Hamas and its supporters want to kill Israeli Jews and pledge to continue to do so, isn't much of the dehumanizing response a form of defensiveness? And how do you get beyond that? Iris, I think you just talked about it at the beginning of the meeting. Whoever wants to refer to this question is welcomed.
Dehumanization has nothing to do with defensiveness. Okay, let's dehumanization and defensiveness are two different things. A very simple textbook definition of dehumanization is a process of depriving individuals of their human qualities or attributing them with negative or inferior traits, essentially treating them as less than human. This can lead to the justification of discriminatory acts, violence, and mistreatment toward those who are dehumanized. This has nothing to do with defensiveness. The definitions are, we're talking about two different phenomena, so maybe with the average person, dehumanization can be understood, subjectively understood, because of, again, cultural political culture repertoire that is being extended to him, that is prevalent, that is feeding from it. Defensiveness can be, dehumanization can be understood mistakenly, tragically understood as defensiveness. However, objectively, we're talking about two different things. So this would be a short answer to this question.
Should I move to the next one, or Ofri or Iris, you want to refer to it? Let's. Yeah.
Well, just yeah, I think our challenge is to create and promote narratives that allow for a vision of yes, coexistence. Amir defined it as survival in some recent text. Yes, we are all some kinds of survivors right now, and we need to highlight stories of shared humanity, of mutual benefits that peace, yes, even peace could bring. This won't be easy, but it is a necessary step to break free from this us or them mindset and move towards a future where both peoples can live with dignity.
I just want to add a short sentence to that. When humanization is politicization, some, I think, tend to mistakenly think that when you say when we talk about humanization, it's like we are depoliticizing the context. However, to politicize, the first condition to talk about politics is to humanize, is to acknowledge the humanity of your enemy, adversary, who who potentially will become should become. We're working. We hope that will become your co-partner for peaceful resolution, as far as it may sound right now.
Another question from Yariv. Do you see a feedback loop between some expressions of disregard to Israelis' life at some factions within the protest on campuses in the West and dehumanization of Palestinians here?
I'm not sure I quite understood.
Do you see any kind of mutual influence between what's going on campuses in the West against Israelis and what's going on here with the dehumanization of Palestinians? Do you see any mutual influence or effects?
Maybe there is, but if there is, it's because, people tend to victimize themselves or to see themselves as victims. If there is, there shouldn't be at all, because protests are sometimes unfair, superficial, sometimes not very knowledgeable, and sometimes absolutely right, but it shouldn't affect in any way our position. We have our own center, I hope. It shouldn't affect unless we want it to affect. And if we want it to affect us, then it means everything about our position. We are still seeing ourselves as the only victim of horrific event 8 months ago, and we have to move on from this position to see what we are contributing to this impossible and savage war.
Thanks. Anyone else? So let's move on then. An anonymous attendee asks, which best way of ending war can you see now for both sides, considering already happened atrocities from both sides and damage done?
External intervention.
International intervention, yeah?
When we diagnose both national communities are suffering from dehumanization, though in different levels. I've seen that one of the participants wrote that we're not talking about dehumanization among the Palestinian national community, and there is dehumanization among the Palestinian community. However, the Israeli Jewish society is much stronger, and it has more ability to develop, entertain, and execute behavior on the basis of dehumanization. That doesn't say that we have to overlook dehumanization also among Arab Palestinians. And when we talk about the day after, and Ofri just alluded to that, we have to recover both communities. However, if we agree here that both communities largely suffer from the lowest point of morality, of moral decay, dehumanization, we have to be courageous enough to understand and to call for external help. Because nothing, if national communities is already their consciousness already polluted by dehumanization, internal politics, internal regular politics has almost no chance or to arc of justice or to the long arc of reconciliation. So this diagnosis should be espoused, should be coupled with the courageous, must needed. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you. I think you can continue.
This diagnosis should be coupled with the call for external help, while, and this is to complete this thesis, while we understand that only external help without fertile political land that can absorb and convert this external help to constructive politics will only lead to more and more siege mentality. So I agree with Ofri here. But first and foremost, we must understand that without external help, external intervention, external pressure, and there's repertoire of opportunities here, these two nations will not find their way out of this 100 years of war, and they will probably start another 100 years of war. So this courageous diagnosis will become infertile if it does not espoused to the call to external intervention. So this is a short take on this.
Thanks, Amir. Ofri, as a historian, what would you say about Amir's answer?
It's not necessarily, yes, as a historian, but I definitely agree with Amir that in general we need pressure, but we also need support in almost like when you support someone that falls or that faints, yes, without a feeling that of some safety or security. Unfortunately, the Israelis would just become more desperate. And yes, in this sense, we didn't see the worst. And And this is a very, very complicated balance, especially in a political international system that it is not very strong nowadays. Yes, we're not in the 1990s where we had a pretty strong post-Cold War international system. Yes, the world is very split right now. And you could really see how Israel is kind of felt safer with the support of Joe Biden. But in this case, it seems that this policy was not very fruitful because it did legitimize very strong violence, military violence by Israelis, but nevertheless we do need such support as well. Yeah, so this is a very complicated balance, and unfortunately, as we see the rise of pretty extreme and yes, insane far right in Europe and possibly in the US, it is very difficult to predict what kind of international support we can expect. Or yes, support not in the sense of support for Israeli army, for Israel actions, but support for yes, for a solution.
And Iris, how do you see the best way to end this conflict, this war at the moment? Do you also agree with Amir and Ofri that international intervention is a must? Or is there any other way? What do you think?
I'm ambivalent because I think there is a good offer, a really good offer on the table. What Biden called Netanyahu offer, what Netanyahu called Biden offer, there is a really good offer on the table which can end the immediate war, which can give Israel a sense of secure, which can rebuild Gaza, which can bring back the hostages, and which will allow everybody to start and lick their wounds. There is a good offer on the table, but Biden doesn't impose it on us. He just, meantime, really doesn't do much more than that. I don't know if it will change in course of time when the election will get near and the polls will show that he suffered from a too pro-Israel position. But if we don't take this offer, I can't see behind it right now. I mean, the Hague International Court will intervene. The siege, how you call it, siege mentality will get stronger in Israel. I can't see beyond the immediate solution right now to bring back the hostages, to stop the war, and to somehow start to rebuild from each side of the conflict. So what will happen later? What will happen when Trump, if he will be elected, will take... I don't want to think about it. I have too many problems as it is.
Yeah, okay. Let's move over to another question by Aviva Goller. Is the dehumanization of Gazans influenced by Donald Trump's attempt to rise to power again? What do you think? If he's elected, how, and this is what Iris doesn't want to think about, but anyhow, how will this influence the subject in Israel and in Gaza?
Yeah, I think just to add to what I said before, the situation in which this war began, the fact that we are in a election season in the US, and Biden seems like a lame duck, is definitely deteriorating the situation, because I think Netanyahu is aware of is well aware of the situation, and the fact that Biden doesn't really have a very strong standing to make any pressure. And yes, what we actually see is the vanishing of this power.
Moran, I would like to add, first of all, I'm no expert on the issue of relationship between Israel and United States, but one of the things that we have learned from this catastrophe that is going on right now is the role of the American empire in this conflict. Many Palestinians now rethink if their conflict is really with Israel or with the American empire, when they see this unprecedented backing, diplomatic, military, political backing of the most powerful empire now to the Israeli war effort, including Biden himself authorizing war plans in the first weeks of within the governmental cabinet, the most sacred, one of the most sacred political entities in Israel, a foreign leader authorizing war plans and monitoring war plans. So I have to say that Palestinians were overwhelmed by this unconditional, maybe unprecedented backing. However, going back to the question, we understand more and more that in order to increase the chances of ending this 100 years of war, culminating now to this horrendous catastrophe, we cannot overlook, Palestinians cannot overlook American internal politics, and they have to be more and more engaged with this politics, and they are becoming more and more engaged with American internal politics. I certainly hope that we will have binational Palestinians and Jewish Israeli forces working within the internal American political arena toward not only to rally around the moral stance, but also to show us the trajectory and the shared political aim, that the shared agreed political aim, political structure of solution that they can agree upon. So we have to engage with the American empire. Hopefully, we will find binational forces working within this political arena after recognizing its tremendous effect on the Israeli politics, on the politics of the conflict.
Thanks. There's another question here by an anonymous attendee. He says, or she says, I'm an American Jewish student protesting Israel's siege on Gaza and dehumanizing treatment of Palestinians, as well as America's unconditional military support, which are obviously not supporting Jewish safety in Israel. Do you see protesting these policies as anti-Israel? And how else do you expect Jewish people in the West to both pressure and support Israel to solve this conflict?
איריס ועופר, אני חושב שזה בשבילכם.
Do you want to refer to this question or?
Ofri?
Yes, I think I partly answered earlier, yes, again, I accept this phrasing of both pressure and support. Yes, I think hoping for international intervention is maybe utopian right now, but it is unfortunately the more realizable utopia or the more possible utopia that we can talk about, because talking about change from within, unfortunately, it's very difficult for me to see it happening right now. At least, completely from within. Of course, there should be some mobilization from within, otherwise it won't work.
I'm not sure it was exactly on the topic of the question. I think, you know, if I understood right, I think she wanted, it was she, wasn't it? It was
Yeah,
she,
yeah, it was she.
who wanted to know how we as Israeli feel about demonstration of Jews against the war and against what Israel does on Gaza. Yes, am I correct? That was the question. And I say, demonstrate ahead, you know, if that's how you feel. I don't know, for some people, it will mean, especially the right wing, it will mean that you become a self-hating Jew. And for other people, it will mean that you keep a moral stand. Just protest. Don't overthink it. I don't think it's a big issue.
Thanks. And I think one last question for now for this meeting. So it's kind of two questions in one. I see here that Lali asked about, she says, shouldn't the solution come from both sides, talking about international intervention? And Molly also asks or writes and asks, international intervention means that we admit that the two sides, the pro-peace communities on both sides, failed. So what role should these communities take in light of this failure? And I think let's end by actually referring to these communities here and both sides, what within both sides can be done.
Who asked it? Molly? Molly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Lali asked, and Lali before that asked about shouldn't the solution come from both sides?
First of all, it has to be embraced by both sides. But as from what we know from the modern history, recent history, that external pressure, intervention. This is why we have international community, by the way. This is one of the reasons that we have international community to assist parties to a conflict, let alone the longest conflict in the modern era, to find a solution. However, it should be absorbed, converted, absorbed by national political alliances on the ground. So, because since if we don't have someone to work with to leverage, to constructively leverage external pressure would lead to nothing. So this is to say, of course, that of course we have to have this binational thing. Did we fail? in less than 9 months, almost 50,000 people were killed. Almost 150,000 people in the homeland were killed or injured. We are now the deadliest conflict in the 21st century. And if we do not admit that we failed, we cannot succeed. All of us has failed, and we should acknowledge our failure. This is an enormous failure to put end to this conflict that resulted in this catastrophe. The resulted in us being in the lowest point of this conflict. To admit that we failed doesn't say that we become irrelevant and that we can succeed in the future. It is admitting that our agency here, our political agency, our political resources are limited. We need help. These two national communities need help to recover. After they get the sufficient help, it is on them, it is their obligation to invest in it, to sustain the peace, and to embark on a new journey, binational journey in this homeland, to open the 100 years of reconciliation that will replace the 100 replace and correct the 100 years of war.
Amen.
Amen.
Anyone else wants to refer, or? Okay, then that's it. We've reached the end of our webinar. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart to Iris Leal, Amir Fakhoury, and Ofri Ilany. Thank you so much for a very interesting and very deep thinking or conversation. And the audience, thank you so much for also participating, and stay tuned for our third webinar sometimes next month. Thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you, Moran, and thank again for Amnesty and for all of you for attending.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Moran. Thank you, Amnesty.